You know that aimless scrolling you do when you should be asleep? That's where this starts. It was a little past 1 a.m., and I was lying on my bed, staring at my phone screen. My dorm room was quiet except for the faint hum of the mini fridge, and the dim glow of my desk lamp lit the space just enough to keep the shadows at bay. I was cycling through memes and posts on some random forum when the notification popped up. Emily sent you a message. I frowned. Emily? I didn't recognize the name. Curious, I tapped the notification and was taken to her profile. Her picture wasn't what I expected. No selfies, no pictures with friends. Just a misty forest with tree trunks blurred into gray smudges, like she'd taken it on a cold, foggy morning. I scrolled through her posts. They were all the same vibe. Abandoned buildings, desolate landscapes, a single swing swaying on an empty playground. It was kind of eerie, but weirdly beautiful too. Not your typical spam account, that was for sure. Her message read, "Hey, saw your post about that indie band, Dead Pines. Didn't think anyone else knew them. Cool taste." I hesitated for a second. My post about Dead Pines was old, buried in my profile. I'd shared a clip of one of their songs months ago, back when I thought they were about to blow up. Only they didn't. And the comment section of that post was a ghost town. Still, her message wasn't too strange. Maybe she was just one of those people who liked digging through profiles. I replied, "No way. You're into Dead Pines?" Thought I was the only one. Got a favorite track? Her response came almost immediately, like she'd been waiting for me to reply. "Black Ashes. The way it builds, it's like walking into a storm. You." That's when the conversation took off. She wasn't just into obscure music. She also liked the same weird indie horror games I played and had read at least half the books on my shelf. It felt like finding a cheat code to friendship, or maybe something more. She was funny, quick-witted, and just easy to talk to. Hours slipped by. At some point, I glanced at the clock. It was 3:43 a.m. I had a full day of classes tomorrow, but I didn't care. Then, she sent a message that made me pause. "So, what's keeping you up tonight?" That was odd. I hadn't mentioned being tired or staying up late. I chalked it up to her being observant. Maybe she'd guessed based on the time. I replied, half joking, "Insomnia, I guess. What about you? Why are you up?" She answered, "Looking for people like you." It wasn't a flirty line. If anything, it felt weirdly direct, like she'd been waiting to say it. Before I could figure out how to respond, she followed up, "So, what's your room like?" That caught me off guard. "My room." I typed back, "It's nothing special. A desk, bed, some posters." "Why?" Her reply came so fast it was like she'd written it before I'd even hit send. "Just trying to picture it. You seem like the type who'd have a messy desk and a half-empty coffee cup by the window." I stared at her message, my stomach twisting a little. My desk was messy. And yeah, there was a coffee cup on the windowsill, the dregs of this afternoon's latte still sitting there. But I hadn't mentioned any of that. A coincidence, I told myself. She was just guessing. It wasn't exactly a Sherlock Holmes-level deduction. Still, it unsettled me. I decided to steer the conversation in a safer direction. "What about you? Where are you from?" Her response came after a longer pause this time, as if she was carefully choosing her words. "Far away, but I'm closer than you think." That weird feeling crept in again, the one that felt like a spider crawling up my back. I finally called it a night around 4 a.m. We'd been talking for nearly 3 hours, and something about our conversation felt addictive. Even when it veered into strange territory, I couldn't help but want to keep talking to her. She was smart and oddly mysterious, and for some reason I liked that. But I also couldn't shake the unease. Lying in bed, the room dark except for the glow of my phone, I scrolled back through our chat. I wanted to reread some of her earlier messages, the ones that had felt a little off. Maybe I was just reading too much into things. At first, everything looked normal, but then I noticed something strange. One of her early messages, the one where she said her favorite song was Black Ashes, had changed. The text was different now. "It feels like falling apart, doesn't it?" My pulse quickened. I was sure, absolutely sure, that wasn't what she'd written before. My eyes darted to the timestamp. It hadn't changed. Same time, same message bubble, but the words were completely different. I kept scrolling, my thumb shaking. Another one of her messages had shifted too. It was earlier in the chat, where she'd said something casual about horror games. Now it read, "Do you feel safe when the lights are off?" I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. My room suddenly felt darker, the shadows thicker. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing. It had to be a glitch, right? Apps mess up all the time. I told myself that over and over, but it didn't make me feel any better. I shut my phone off and threw it onto the desk. The glow of the screen died, plunging the room into complete darkness. And then, just as I was about to close my eyes, I heard the faintest vibration, the buzz of a notification. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my phone. The screen lit up, displaying a single new message from Emily. "Don't forget to lock your door tonight." I wanted to stop talking to her. After that first night, the changing messages, the comment about locking my door, I told myself I'd block her, delete the app, and move on. But I didn't. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Or maybe it was because when she wasn't being outright creepy, Emily was fascinating. She had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world who truly got her. And I guess I liked how she got me too. The obscure music we both loved, the niche books and games we obsessed over. It was rare to meet someone who matched me on such a weirdly specific level. So yeah, I didn't block her. I couldn't. Not yet. Over the next couple of days, Emily and I talked almost constantly. We stayed up late trading favorite playlists, debating stupid fan theories about horror movies, and sharing embarrassing childhood stories. She was quick-witted and sharp, but there was also something vulnerable about her. It felt like she was letting me see a side of her that no one else had access to. Still, every once in a while, she'd say something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Like when she mentioned my favorite coffee shop out of nowhere. "Emily, bet you're the type who orders an overpriced latte every morning at Java Stop." I froze for a second when I read that. Java Stop was my usual spot, but it wasn't like I ever posted about it. I brushed it off. Maybe it was a lucky guess? It's not like Java Stop was some hidden gem. Lots of students went there. But then she did it again. "Emily, your dorm must feel pretty empty with your roommate gone all weekend." That one hit harder. She was right. My roommate Jake had gone home for the weekend, but I hadn't told her that. Hell, I hadn't told anyone. Jake packed up while I was out, so I barely even saw him leave. My stomach twisted as I stared at her message. I replied, trying to sound casual, "How do you know my roommate's gone?" She answered almost instantly, "You mentioned it earlier. Don't you remember?" No, I didn't. I scrolled back through her chat, looking for where I might have let that detail slip. Nothing. The conversation felt different, like there were gaps in it, parts one couldn't account for. It didn't make sense, but I couldn't figure out how to call her out without sounding paranoid. That night, I lay awake, replaying the conversations in my head. Was she just really good at piecing things together? Or was she, I don't know, watching me somehow? The idea felt ridiculous, but I couldn't shake it. I was starting to notice small things around my dorm, like the way my window was unlocked even though I was sure I'd locked it earlier, or how my desk chair seemed just slightly out of place, like someone had sat there while I was out. The next night, she crossed a line I couldn't ignore. We were chatting, as usual, about random stuff. She was talking about a weird indie horror movie she'd seen, something about cursed videotapes. I wasn't really paying attention. I'd had a rough day and was mostly replying with LOL, and that's crazy, to keep the conversation going. Then she sent this. "Emily, why were you crying yesterday?" I sat up in bed, the phone suddenly heavy in my hand. Yesterday. I had cried yesterday. Full-on broke down, actually after a brutal phone call with my dad. He'd been yelling at me about my grades, saying I wasn't taking school seriously, and by the time the call ended, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I locked my door, turned out the lights, and just lost it. It was one of those moments you don't admit to anyone, let alone a girl you met online. My hands trembled as I typed back. "What are you talking about?" "Emily, yesterday, around 5 p.m., I think, you were sitting on the floor by your bed, crying into your hands." My chest tightened. I felt like I was going to throw up. "Me? How the hell do you know that?" Her reply came a minute later, longer than usual. "Emily, I just felt it. You seemed sad. I wanted to make sure you were okay." That wasn't an answer, and she knew it. "Me? That doesn't make any sense. Were you outside my dorm or something? Are you stalking me?" "Emily, no. Of course not. I told you I just felt it, like a connection or something. She followed up with another message before I could reply. Emily, don't be mad. I just care about you. That did it. Whatever connection I thought we had, whatever excuses I'd made for her before, it didn't matter. This was too much. My chest felt tight, like the walls of my room were closing in. I needed to get away from her. I needed to end this. Look, I can't do this anymore. Don't message me again. Her response was immediate. Emily, Ryan, don't do that. Please. I ignored it. I muted the app and turned off notifications. My hands were still shaking as I tossed my phone onto my desk and collapsed onto my bed. The room was silent except for my uneven breaths. It felt like a weight had been lifted off me, like I'd finally broken free of something suffocating. For the first time in weeks, I thought I might actually sleep. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on my desk. My clock read 3:12 a.m. I groaned, fumbling for the phone. My first thought was that it was Jake. Maybe he'd come back early and needed to be let in. But when I glanced at the screen, my stomach dropped. A notification. From her. I hadn't unmuted the app. And yet there it was. Emily, don't ignore me. I'll see you tomorrow. My breath caught in my throat. My hands went cold as I stared at the words, my mind racing. How? I'd muted the app, hadn't I? I checked the settings, and sure enough, notifications were still off. But her message had come through anyway. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall and pretend none of this was happening. Instead, I sat there in the dark, staring at her message until the screen dimmed and my reflection stared back at me. She was playing with me, and I had no idea how to make it stop. The next morning, I felt like a zombie. I hadn't slept, not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see her message. Don't ignore me. I'll see you tomorrow. The words hung in my head like a bad song stuck on repeat. I knew I had to do something, but what? Call the cops? Tell them a random girl from the internet was creeping me out? What would I even say? Instead, I did what I always did. I tried to act like everything was fine. I went about my day pretending I wasn't unraveling. I went to class, grabbed coffee at Java Stop, even though just being there made me feel exposed, and then hit the library to cram for an upcoming exam. That's when I noticed her. At first, it was just a glimpse. A girl with long dark hair sitting a few rows away, hunched over a table. Her hair covered most of her face, but something about her made my stomach twist. She wasn't looking at me. Not that I could tell, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was aware of me. I shook it off and forced myself to focus on my notes. But every time I looked up, she seemed closer. The second time I noticed her, she was only 2 rows away, still not looking at me, but her presence felt heavier, like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I tried to convince myself it wasn't the same girl. Plenty of people have dark hair. The library was full of students. By the time I saw her a third time, she was at the table directly across from me. I stared, my pulse thundering in my ears. She sat perfectly still, her head bowed, her face obscured by a curtain of hair. She wasn't moving, wasn't flipping through a book or scrolling on her phone, just sitting there like she was waiting for something. The air around me felt thick, like I was breathing through a wet rag. I stood up, deciding to confront her, to prove to myself this was just some coincidence. Hey, I said, my voice unsteady. She didn't respond. I took a step closer, then another. My hands felt clammy, and I realized I hadn't taken a proper breath since I stood up. When I reached her table, my stomach dropped. The chair was empty. I spun around, scanning the rows of bookshelves and tables. She was gone, just gone. By the time I got back to my dorm that evening, I felt like I was losing my mind. My room felt cold, even though the radiator was on full blast. I couldn't focus on my homework, couldn't bring myself to eat. Every shadow outside my window, every creak in the floorboards felt like a threat. And then my phone buzzed. I stared at it for a long moment, my hand hovering over the screen like touching it might burn me. When I finally picked it up, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a text. It was a video call. From her. The profile picture was a foggy photo of a forest, the same one I'd seen the night she first messaged me. I don't know why I answered. Maybe I thought it would give me closure, that I could confront her and end whatever this was. Or maybe I was just too scared to ignore her again. I swiped to accept the call. The screen went black for a second before her face appeared. If I expected answers, I didn't get them. Most of her face was hidden in shadows, and her dark hair fell across one side, covering her eye. I could barely make out her features, but I could tell she was smiling. Soft laughter came through the speaker. Not a friendly laugh, though. It was low and deliberate, like she was amused by some private joke at my expense. "Hey, Ryan," she said. Her voice was familiar, but it carried an edge now, a sharpness that made my skin crawl. I couldn't bring myself to respond. "You've been avoiding me," she continued, tilting her head slightly. The shadows shifted across her face, and for a brief moment, her teeth looked sharp, like the edges were just a little too pointed. "That's not very nice. What the hell do you want?" I finally forced out. My voice cracked, and I hated myself for how small I sounded. She ignored the question. Instead, she started humming. The tune was faint at first, almost like static, but as it grew louder, recognition hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a lullaby. Not just any lullaby. The lullaby. The one my mom used to sing to me when I was a kid and couldn't sleep. It wasn't something I'd ever mentioned to anyone, not even my closest friends. "How do you know that?" I demanded. Her smile widened. "Ryan," she said, her voice almost sweet now. "You've let me in. You've told me everything. Even the things you don't remember telling me." My breath hitched. "This isn't funny. Who the hell are you? You know who I am." No, I don't." "Yes, you do," she said softly. Then, as if to prove her point, she started humming again. I couldn't take it anymore. "Stop," I snapped, cutting her off. My fear boiled over into anger. "I'm done with this. I'm done with you. Stay the hell away from me." Her smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew colder, more detached. "You'll come back," she said, her tone eerily calm. "They always do." I hung up before she could say another word. I spent the next hour deleting everything. I wiped my social media accounts, deactivated my profiles, and blocked every number and email connected to her. By the time I was done, I felt drained but relieved, like I'd finally taken control of the situation. For the first time in weeks, I crawled in a bed and felt a sliver of peace. But it didn't last. At 3:03 a.m., my phone buzzed. My heart sank as I reached for it, dread pooling in my stomach. The screen lit up with a new text message from an unknown number. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the notification. I didn't want to read it, but some part of me already knew I didn't have a choice. I opened the message. "Deleting me won't help. You're mine." The room felt colder than it should have been. I stared at the words until my vision blurred, unable to shake the feeling that something, was watching me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. For the next 3 days, my life became a waking nightmare. At first, the messages were almost innocuous, cryptic jokes and strange riddles from the unknown number. One read, "Why do you lock the door? You know it doesn't matter." Another, "Do you still see me in the library, Ryan?" I tried to ignore them. I told myself it was someone messing with me, maybe even Jake pulling some elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't just the texts. Sometimes I get images. The first one was of my dorm window. It had been taken at night, from the outside looking in. My blinds were half drawn, and in the photo, I could see myself sitting at my desk, headphones on, completely oblivious. My stomach flipped when I realized the photo had been taken earlier that same night. I told myself it couldn't be real. Maybe it was an old picture, something she'd somehow found online or doctored. But when the second photo came, it was worse. It was a close-up of my door. The timestamp on the message said it was sent 5 minutes ago. The breaking point came the next night. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep despite the mounting paranoia. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I groaned, already dreading what I'd see. It wasn't a photo this time. It was an audio file. I hesitated, but my curiosity won out. I pressed play. At first, it was just static. Then I heard it, my own voice, screaming. It wasn't a normal scream. It was raw, panicked, like the sound of someone being tortured. I immediately turned it off, my hands shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. Another text came through a second later. You sound so scared. I like it. That was it. I couldn't do this anymore. The next morning, I went to the nearest phone store and bought a brand new phone with a fresh number. It cost me more money than I had, but I didn't care. I just wanted to cut her off completely. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope as I powered up the new device. There was no way she'd be able to reach me now. That hope lasted less than 5 minutes. As soon as the phone booted up, it buzzed in my hand. You can't run from me, Ryan. I dropped the phone like it had burned me, my chest tightening as the screen lit up again with another message. This isn't about the phone. It's about you. Desperate and out of options, I reached out to my friend Megan. She was the tech-savvy type, always fiddling with gadgets and hacking into things just to see if she could. If anyone could figure out what was going on, it was her. I met Megan at the library that afternoon. Her eyebrows knit together as I explained everything. Emily, the text, the photos, the audio files. I could tell she didn't believe me. Not entirely, but she could see how freaked out I was. All right, she said, pulling out her laptop. Let me see the messages. I'll figure out where they're coming from. I handed her my phone reluctantly. She scrolled through the texts, her face growing more serious with every passing second. This is weird, she muttered. No kidding, I said, pacing behind her. Can you trace them or something? Yeah, hold on. She spent the next 20 minutes running programs I didn't understand, typing furiously while I hovered nearby. Finally, she leaned back in her chair, her face pale. What is it? I asked, my heart sinking. She turned the laptop around to show me the screen. The messages, they're coming from your own number. I stared at her, uncomprehending. That's not possible. It's a new number, a new phone. How? I don't know, she said, cutting me off. But this isn't normal. Someone's either spoofing your number or, she trailed off, shaking her head. Or what? I pressed. She hesitated. Or it's something else. Something I can't explain. Megan offered to stay with me that night. I didn't argue. The idea of being alone in my dorm was unbearable, especially after what she'd just told me. We set up camp in the living area, with Megan sprawled on the couch and me in the armchair. We left the lights on and tried to distract ourselves with a movie, but neither of us was really watching it. I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for the next message. Around 2 a.m., I must have dozed off. When I woke up, the room was eerily silent. Megan, I called out groggily. No response. I sat up, my chest tightening. The couch was empty. Megan's phone lay on the floor. The screen cracked. My stomach flipped as I reached for it, my fingers trembling. The screen lit up, displaying a single message. You shouldn't have interfered. I tore through the dorm, calling Megan's name, but she was gone. Her bag, her jacket, they were all still there. It didn't make any sense. Finally, I stumbled back to my room, my mind racing with panic. That's when I saw it. A piece of paper slipped under my door. I picked it up with shaking hands, recognizing the neat handwriting immediately. I'm closer than you think. I sank to the floor, clutching the note, my breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops? Call Megan's parents? What would I even say? All I could think about was her voice on that video call, the way she'd said, "You've let me in." Somehow, she wasn't just in my phone. She was in my life. And no matter what I did, I couldn't get her out. By the time I got the next message, I'd stopped pretending there was a way out. I'd stopped sleeping too. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear her voice, soft and sing-song, whispering my name over and over again. Ryan, Ryan, you can't run. Sometimes, I'd wake up and think I saw her in the corner of my room, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. But when I turned on the light, nothing was there. I didn't tell anyone about Megan. What could I say? That she'd vanished without a trace after trying to help me? No one would believe me. I wasn't even sure I believed myself anymore. The texts kept coming. They weren't as cryptic now. It's almost time. Are you ready to meet me? The last one came 2 days after Megan disappeared. Come to 148 Birch Hollow Road. Tonight. Ein Uhr nachts. I should have ignored it. I should have thrown my phone in the river and walked away. But I couldn't. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. At this point, I couldn't tell if it was her voice whispering in my head or my own thoughts, but either way, I knew I had no choice. The house was exactly what I expected. 148 Birch Hollow Road was one of those places you drive past and think, who the hell would live there? It was an old, rotting two-story house on the edge of town, surrounded by overgrown trees and weeds. The windows were shattered, the roof sagged, and the whole place smelled like mold and decay. I parked my car on the shoulder of the road and stared at the house for a long time. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Don't go in," I whispered to myself. "This is insane." But I was already opening the door, my feet moving before my brain caught up. The front door was ajar, hanging crookedly on its hinges. The wind creaked it open just enough for me to slip inside. The smell hit me first: damp wood, stale air, and something else, something faintly metallic like rust or blood. I pulled my hoodie up over my nose and stepped into the house. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, every sound amplified by the emptiness of the space. The only light came from my phone's flashlight, and even that felt weak, swallowed by the shadows that stretched across the walls. I didn't know what I was looking for, but part of me already knew I'd find it. At the end of the hallway, there was a door. It was slightly open, and I could see a faint glow spilling out from inside. My phone buzzed in my hand. "You're almost there. Don't stop now." The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was colder, heavier. The room was small and windowless, illuminated only by a single dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. My flashlight swept across the walls, and I froze. The walls were covered in photos of me. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Printed out pictures, Polaroids, screenshots. Every surface was plastered with images of my face, my dorm, my car, even my family. Some of them were recent. So recent I recognized the clothes I was wearing yesterday. My legs wobbled, threatening to give out beneath me. In the center of the room was a chair. On the chair was a phone. It wasn't mine. It looked older, like one of those ancient flip phones from the early 2000s. Its screen glowed faintly in the dim light. I took a shaky step forward, and the phone buzzed. A message popped up on the screen. "Turn around." My blood turned to ice. Every instinct screamed at me not to do it. But I did. She was there. Or at least, something that looked like her was. Emily stood in the corner of the room, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her face was pale, her features warped, like a digital image that hadn't fully loaded. Her skin flickered in and out, glitching like static on a broken TV. But her smile was the worst part. It stretched too wide, the corners of her mouth curling up into something grotesque and inhuman. "Hi, Ryan," she said, her voice distorted. It sounded layered, like two people speaking at once. I stumbled back, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. "Who, what? What are you?" I stammered. Her smile grew wider. "You already know," she said, taking a step closer. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. "You were never talking to me, Ryan. You were talking to yourself." My back hit the wall. "What the hell does that mean?" She laughed, a sound that made my ears ring. "It means," she whispered, her face now inches from mine, "I'm the part of you you can't escape. You invited me in, Ryan. And now," she placed a cold, flickering hand on my chest. "Now you're mine." The light bulb above us shattered, plunging the room into darkness. I woke up hours later, lying on the floor of the room. The photos were gone. The phone was gone. She was gone. But my own phone was sitting next to me. The screen cracked, a single message lighting up the display. "We're not done yet." The story could have ended there. I could have disappeared like Megan, leaving nothing behind but questions and a few scattered possessions. But it didn't. A week later, a random Reddit user posted in a local forum. The post read, "I found this phone in an abandoned house at 148 Birch Hollow Road. It's old, cracked, and barely works, but there's one message on it that freaked me out. I don't know who it's from, but it just says, 'Would you like to meet her too?'"